If you saw in my last video, I was playing Runick Striker, one of the most disgusting yet efficient decks of all time. If Sky Striker is one of your most favorite archetypes and you want to give it the gas it needs to finally come out on top and you don't want to rely on floodgates, at least too many, then I've got the sauce for you. If you need proof of my belief in the deck, it's actually the only TCG deck that I've owned within the past 12 months. So, let's get into it. The deck can be broken down into two pieces, Runick and Striker as the name suggests. Runicks are a series of spells that either special summon a Nordic-inspired monster to your EMZ, such as Hugin or Mugen, that add additional support from the deck or graveyard, or has a utility type effect alongside banishing cards from the top of your opponent's deck. Runick Destruction, for example, destroys a spell or trap on your opponent's field to banish the top 4 cards of their deck. Additionally, thanks to their field spell Runick Fountain, as a soft once per turn, whenever you activate a Runick spell, you can target up to 3 of them in your graveyard, return them to the bottom of the deck, and draw an equal amount of cards returned, making for some insane draw extension and digging. Sky Striker is a deck that heavily relies on Sky Striker Ace Ray and her mecha suits, which grab archetypal utility spells from the deck or graveyard in order to be recycled in order to deal with your opponent's board. For her mecha suits, an example can be Sky Striker Ace Kagari, which adds a Striker spell from graveyard to hand. An example of a Striker spell could be Widow Anchor, which if you control no monsters in your main monster zone, you could target one face-up effect monster on the field, negate its effects, and if you have 3 or more spells in your graveyard, you have the option of taking control of it. Now you may be wondering, hey, didn't you mention that this deck needs Ray in order to go into your extra deck monsters? How are we even summoning them? Don't the Runicks take up the EMZ anyways? Welp, that's where Linkage comes in. Sky Striker Mobilize Linkage is absolutely broken and is a new card that was just recently released in both the TCG and Master Duel that allows you to send a card you control to the graveyard, say for instance a Runick spell resolving on the field, or a Pot of Desires being resolved, or a Hugin in the EMZ to summon a Striker monster from your extra deck while locking you into Strikers for the rest of the turn. A restriction I assure will literally never come up. This adds an all new depth of interaction to the deck. You're able to play around cards like Imperm and Effect Veiler on your Runick summons extremely easily by tagging your monsters out with Linkage. You're not forced to play multiple copies of what is essentially Mystic Tomato and pals in Ray and Rose. You can always essentially guarantee an extremely spell-loaded graveyard with the Runick spells to turn on your Striker spells, and Runick Fountain lets you draw into even more Striker and Runick cards, allowing for this well-oiled machine of green turbo. It's a deck that can go both first and second without any issue versus almost any kind of deck. Speaking of decks, let's get into this one card by card. I'll try to go over it in a comprehensive manner for those who are new to the archetypes and in the order of Striker spells, Runicks, and then everything else. Engage is a spell that allows you, if you have no monsters in your main monster zone, an effect shared by just about every single Striker spell, to search a Striker card except Engage, and if you have 3 or more spells engraved, you get to draw a card. Note that it's not once per turn, so have fun going basically plus infinite with this over and over again. Next up is Afterburners, which allows you to target a monster on the field, destroy it, and if you have 3 or more spells in your graveyard, you get to destroy a spell or trap on the board, which is non-targeting, so keep that in mind. Additionally, we have its counterpart, Jamming Waves, which targets a spell trap on the field, destroys it. Then if you have 3 or more spells in your graveyard, you get to destroy a monster on the field, again, non-targeting. Multi-roll is your primary way of recycling spells outside of Kagari, so once per turn you could target one other card you control, send that card to the graveyard, and also your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to your spell card activations for the rest of this turn. This is used in combination with, say, set quick play spells, which, for example, if multi-roll targets a set quick play, you chain the quick play, and you've just gotten the best of both worlds with the quick play's value, and basically turning everything into a spell speed 4. Additionally, once per turn during the end phase, you can set Sky Striker spells with different names from your graveyard up to the number of Sky Striker spell cards you activated this turn while this card was face up on your field, but banish them when they leave the field. So if you activate, say, 2 Striker spells this turn, you get to set 2 from your grave and they're banished when they leave the field. And this basically lets you to just basically recur upwards of 4 cards, but if you have Runick Fountain up, try to limit it to just 3, so you have a zone for your Runick spells to be activated from the hand. For quick plays, we have a Widow Anchor, which allows you to target a monster, negate its effects, and if you have 3 engraved, gives you the option to take control of it. It's a great defensive option and even offensive option if you want to link climb or stave off an attack. We play 2 Shark Cannon because Channelment doesn't exist yet, and you can target a monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish it, and if you have 3 engraved, you can special it to your board and it cannot attack. And finally, what makes the deck tick? Sky Striker Mobilize Linkage, which sends a card you control to the graveyard and special summons a striker mech to the EMZ. This is amazing as it allows you to dodge cards like Imperm on Veiler, like previously mentioned, and doesn't lock you into playing Ray and friends. Now, onto the Runick cards. We have the best card in the deck, Runick Fountain, which allows you to activate Runick quick play spells from your hand during your opponent's turn. Additionally, as a soft once per turn, meaning you can do this multiple times if you have 2 or 3 fountains, after you activate a Runick card, you can target up to 3 Runick quick plays in your graveyard, put them at the bottom of the deck in any order, and draw an equal amount of cards, which is incredible for drawing into, say, more Runick cards for your opponent's turn, or cards like Engage, Widow Anchor, just absolutely insanity. For the quick plays, we have Runick Tip. Runick Tip reads activate one of these effects, but skip your next battle phase activation. Note that every Runick quick play shares this effect, and you actually have to attempt to enter the battle phase in order for it to bypass, and you can't just proceed to the end phase. Additionally, keep in mind that in Yu-Gi-Oh!, if you do not enter the battle phase and is skipped, say due to the Runick spell effects, you will not be able to go to your main phase 2, but you will immediately proceed to the end phase, so keep that in mind as well. Its utility effect is to search a Runick card from your deck to your hand, except itself, and then banish the top card of your opponent's deck, which I will refer to as Banish Milling. Its secondary effect is to special 1 Runick monster from your extra deck to the extra monster zone, and you can only activate 1 Runick Tip per turn. Note that again, every Runick quick play shares this secondary effect to special summon and can only be activated once per turn. For the disruptors, Flashing Fire allows you to target and destroy an opponent's special summon monster, and Banish Mill 2. Destruction allows you to target and destroy an opponent's spell trap, and Banish Mills 4. Freezing Curses targets and negates an effect monster your opponent controls until the end of the turn, and Banish Mills 3. And Slumber allows you to target a face-up monster on the field. The next time it would be destroyed by battle or a card effect, it is actually not, and it cannot attack that turn, and Banish Mills 3. Note that this is the only Runick quick play spell outside of Tip that you can activate without needing your opponent to commit an action, since you can slumber your own monsters such as Hugin or even your striker stuff. And finally, we have Smiting Storm, which banishes cards from the top of your opponent's deck up to the number of cards they control. Why doesn't it always mill exactly equal to why they control? Well, here we get into Yu-Gi-Oh! Rulings, everybody's favorite thing. Because of this specific conjunctive, you cannot attempt to activate the Banish Mill effect if your opponent does not have enough cards to mill. For example, you cannot activate Destruction's effect to pop a back row if your opponent only has 3 cards left in their deck. Smiting Storm gets around itself, being potentially, again, completely useless, by allowing you to choose how many you banish, so that even if your opponent has 4 cards on the field and only 2 cards in deck, you could still storm them for 2 and deck them out. And finally, onto the generics. Pot of Desires is a generic draw spell that draws 2. I don't think I have to explain why Pot of Greed is good at this deck, and because every card in this deck is essentially a 3-of, who cares what we banish? We have Call by the Grave to hedge against stuff like hand traps, and the best card in the deck secretly, we have Triple Tactics Talents, which is a great option for playing through hand traps and generating more resources, as well as being a disruption through its Thoughtseize-like effect or stealing cards like Baron de Fleur. Also, it's a spell, so that's neat. Onto the extra deck, we have 2 Hugin, the most important card in here. When it's special summoned, you could discard a card and add a Runick field spell from your deck to your hand, aka Fountain, and it basically allows every single Runick spell to just double up as terraforming. If another card you control be destroyed by card effect, you could banish Hugin instead, functioning similarly to Salamangreat Banelinks, allowing you to protect mid-chain. Next we have Munin, which discards to add a continuous Runick spell from deck to hand. Spoilers, it's terrible, so we're not playing it. And if your opponent activates a card that targets a Runick or set card, you can banish Munin to negate that effect and destroy that card. It also heals you for 1k every turn during every end phase, so So yeah, have fun winning in time. And finally, we have Gary, who targets a non-quickfire Runick spell in your graveyard, also known as Fountain, and adds it to your hand, and when it dies by battle, you can target and destroy a card on the field. For the mecha pilots, we have Kagari, which basically allows you to recycle a striker spell in your graveyard to add it to hand, and it gains attack points equal to the number of spells in your graveyard times 100. Shizuku drains the opponent's monsters by 100 attack and defense for each spell in your graveyard, and during the end phase, you can add a striker spell from your deck to hand with a different name from the cards in your graveyard if it was summoned that turn, which is great because who would have guessed that Skarm is a good card. We have Hayate, which attacks directly, and if it battles, you can send a striker card from deck to graveyard. Great for sending stuff that you want to add back with Kagari. And we have Kayana, who, if it's special summoned, you get to target a face-up monster your opponent controls. It cannot attack until the end phase of your opponent's turn, and every time you activate a Sky Striker spell card or effect, you gain 100 life points immediately after the card or effect resolves. So again, have fun winning in time with this deck. Then we have one copy of Zeke, which requires 2 monsters, including a Sky Striker Ace monster, which can be made with, I don't know, maybe Hugin plus a token off of the little Hornet drones, and it must be link summoned, and you can only special summon it once per turn. If it's link summoned, you can target a face-up monster on the field, banish it until your opponent's next end phase. So it's good for getting rid of monsters that, you know, can't really be destroyed by card effects. Once per turn, you can target one other card you control, say a monster in your main monster zone, or maybe just you need to clear up a zone. It gains 1000 attack, and then you send that card to the graveyard. Note that because Zeke is a Striker Ace monster and a Dark, you can go into any of the other pilots, which is super duper neat. And finally, we're just playing one generic monster to clean up the main monster zone in sticky scenarios if we're stealing with Widowmakers and Shard Cannons. So the card that I've settled on is Nightmare Phoenix, which discards a card to pop a spell or trap card on the board, and you could draw a card if it was co-linked when the effect was activated. If you feel like you don't need a generic, you could very easily cut this for a third Hugin or a second Zeke. Other good inclusions are Nightmare Cerberus, Nightmare Unicorn, Axis Code Talker, and the Light and Dark Charmer links. Let's go over some combos. And by combo, I don't really mean combos in the traditional sense, because this deck doesn't really rely on monsters. A lot of your combos are more just setups in order to try and basically just draw you a trillion cards and get as much resources onto your field and in your hand as possible. So here are 2 basic ones. So this first one can be done with any Runick spell, a discard, and a Runick card activatable on an empty board. We're going to use Freezing Curses in order to special summon ourselves Hugin. Hugin is going to discard basically any card. It's going to be Talents in this instance. It's going to add ourselves Runick Fountain. We're going to activate the Runick Fountain, and once that finishes resolving, we're going to activate our activatable Runick spell. In this case, it's going to be Slumber. Tip also works just fine. And then Runick Fountain is going to trigger. We're going to target our 2 Runick spells, put them at the bottom of the deck, doesn't really matter which order, and we're going to shuffle them back and draw 2 cards. If you already have Runick Fountain on board, you can additionally chain block the Runick Fountain if you're afraid of Ash, going Fountain 1 and Hugin 2. If you want an additional draw and are willing to risk running into Ash Blossom, you could chainlink 1 Hugin to discard a Runick spell, and chainlink 2 Fountain to target the Runick spell you just discarded to shuffle it back and cycle for a new card. Personally, my order of priorities for cards to search off of Tip, if you are going to be using Tip in this sort of combo or just in general, is Flashing Fire first, Freezing Curses second, Slumber third, and Destruction fourth. If you really need to access the field spell because Hugin was Ash or your graveyard was loaded with Runick spells, grabbing Fountain off of Tip is fine as well. Additionally, if you're in a scenario where your opponent is stuck on a singular monster and can't get rid of your monster through removal or such as Salesman Rango Miniad, searching Slumber is your top priority since you will eventually